On Tech News Today, our end-of-the-year special on one of the biggest stories of the year, women in technology. Stick around. Tech News Today is next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Monday, December 22nd, 2014. Tech News Today is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace recently launched the latest version of their platform, Squarespace 7, which has a completely redesigned interface, integrations with Getty Images and Google Apps, new templates, and an incredible feature called Cover Pages. Try the new Squarespace at squarespace.com and enter the offer code TNT at checkout to get 10% off. And by Personal Capital. With Personal Capital, you'll have many more happy holidays as you grow and protect your wealth with this award-winning financial app. Best of all, it's free. To sign up, go to personalcapital.com/TNT. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan, and Anthony Nielsen is at the controls. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Great. And our co-anchor today is Elise Hu. Welcome to you, Elise Hu.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
Now, of course, we recorded this back in November, and this is for December 22nd. So this is part of our special holiday coverage. Tune in every single day this week for all of our most controversial topics of the year. And today we've got a fantastic topic and a fantastic panel. So why don't we jump right into it? A few years ago, the San Jose Mercury News waged a battle with Silicon Valley giants like Apple and Google for those companies to release their diversity numbers. And in recent years, and especially this year, tech companies have been increasingly doing just that. And the results are pretty grim. Gender is split about 70-30 in favor of men at Apple, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all the usual suspects. And that's for all the various jobs in those companies. In tech-specific jobs, the number drops to about 16%. Joining us to talk about this issue are two more journalists who've written brilliantly on the subject, Selena Larson, who's a writer at the Daily Dot, and Sarah Frier, a reporter for Bloomberg. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Now, Sarah, you're on the screen already, so we'll start with you. The diversity numbers are the tip of the iceberg. Of course, these are, huge issues that impact people's lives, their careers. But what are some of the other dimensions of the problem besides just how many women versus how many men are in tech companies? What do women engineers and others in the technology industry actually experience, and what did they go through?
What we found over interviewing dozens of such women is that it's not so much about the blatant sexism. It's not so much about people saying, oh, I'm not going to hire you because you're a woman. It's more about the day-to-day grind with people who maybe just are not sensitive to the issue and maybe just are saying things or excluding women from certain projects. It's the unconscious bias that really grates down over time.
I've seen you talk about this and write about this in other contexts, and so you've used a lot of examples. Like, for example, there'll be a tech event, and people will assume that a woman, a software engineer, is somebody's girlfriend, or
right.
This sort of thing. Or they assume that somebody who's manning a booth is like a booth babe or whatever. And there's this this sort of daily constant assumption. It's the constant assumptions that people are met with in the industry. Can you give us a few other examples of what people go through?
Well, sometimes it's as simple as people being really surprised that you have technical knowledge, or being very surprised that you can handle something. You'll be invited to conferences just because you're a woman, which can be great, but then at the same time, you have to deal with the men who think that you're there just because you're a woman. There was one woman we talked to who, when she was pregnant, kept getting questions about whether she was going to close her startup. She said, of course not. I mean, this is my company, but she had to deal with that and deal with the maternity leave and recruits just disappearing.
Selena, I'm curious, and just so that we can sort of set a marker down here, why is it important? How do you explain to folks why it's important to have diversity in the tech world? And not just male, female, but also people of color included, which is another problem in the industry right now.
Yeah, so there's actually been quite a few studies done that when you have a diverse team, you get more feedback and more ideas that can actually improve your product. So if you think about it from a business perspective, actually having diversity on your team is good for the business and can actually improve revenue, improve your product. Not only that, but a lot of times you see in Silicon Valley, a lot of these companies are kind of created and developed by the same type of people building for people like themselves. And when that happens, you find that your products might be wildly successful among white men like yourself, but then you're missing this huge portion of the global community that's a potential target or a potential consumer of your product. So if you're not aware of the needs of other people, other clients, other particular consumers, then you can become very blind to those issues. And that's not, if you think about it from a business perspective, it's not good for a business perspective. But also, I mean, just for developing tools and resources, I mean, to have diverse perspectives brings a lot of new ideas and interest to the company. And I think that that's something that no matter where you go, you can always learn from other people. And if you're kind of just in this hive mind, this one mindset, then you miss out on a lot of great ideas.
Yeah, and we'll get into later just how narrow the pool tends to be. It's not only white men, but it's white men from 3 schools. But we'll get into that later in the show. Selena, now you wrote a really interesting piece based on what you witnessed at the Grace Hopper celebration event recently. I think that was in October, and there was a panel called the Male Allies Plenary Panel. And it involved men who lead technology companies. What did you? Can you describe what you witnessed during that panel?
Yeah, so it actually wasn't that unique. I mean, there was a lot of backlash to it, mostly because it was an event that was for women, and it was a panel of all men. The moderator was a woman, but the ideas and conversations that they were having were just the typical conversations. It's the feedback that you hear over and over. It's just work just as hard as men and you will be just as successful as your male counterparts. And they completely disregarded the advice and the experiences of a lot of these women. It's not that women aren't working as hard as men. It's that they're not given the same opportunities. They're not given the same respect. There's a lot of that unconscious bias that was not addressed. And during the panel, there was actually a bunch of anonymous people handed out bingo cards that say, "Oh, X this square if they say something that we've heard before." And halfway through the panel, someone actually yelled "bingo" because these phrases that are uttered over and over, lean in, men's voices need to be heard too. My mother or my sister, she was a feminist and that made me become a feminist. There's a lot of this that's repeated over and over again. And it's clear that it's not working. And it's clear that working just as hard as men doesn't get you as far as men. And that's something that that they completely overlooked. And so it was really interesting to be in the audience because every single woman in the room had a bad experience working in technology. And it was something that wasn't necessarily talked about, was this perspective that they completely overlooked and said, well, I know because this is my experience.
Well, Selena, you talk about the meritocracy issue, and that was something that was really interesting. And in my reporting, I found that even the women sometimes felt very strongly that meritocracy was a very important part of it, where they would see a lot of women that they thought were blaming their lack of success on sexism or on because they were a woman. And, you know, they sort of fought against it and said, you know, I worked hard to get where I am and I don't want to be looped in with that women in tech, you know, people thinking I'm an activist. I actually earned where I am and I'm not using. So there are a couple sides to it. It's kind of a tough line to think about when you're a woman in the industry and trying to navigate your career.
Yeah, well, and that's also difficult too, because a lot of times women will speak up and they're concerned about coming across as bitchy or shrill or bossy. And there are these adjectives and descriptive words that you apply to women, and they don't want to necessarily be seen as that, but they also want to make sure that they're heard and that their voice is heard, and they're coming across, if they have a criticism about their particular company or their team or how things are managed, you definitely walk that fine line of being one of the guys versus being the woman in the room that is bossy, right?
Right.
I've seen a lot of written a lot of things that people have written about the weird machinations that a lot of women have to go through to to deal with the expectation of all of these stereotypes and all of the assumptions, including things like women telling other women, use a black coffee cup so there's no lipstick on your coffee cup, because then people are one thing or another about you. Don't wear bright colors because they'll think this, that, and the other thing about you. There's a long list of those kinds of things that actually women have been sort of forced into thinking about and doing weird stuff like that, aren't there, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to women who, one woman in particular who wore cargo pants throughout the 90s to try to blend in with her colleagues at Amazon and Microsoft. You talk to other women who fear wearing heels to work because they think that, just even the sound of it will cause people to notice them and have them stick out. So you do see a lot of little things like this. I saw a post the other day on, I think it was Jezebel, about Zuckerberg's same shirt every day rule, how he thinks it's frivolous to think about something other than getting your work done, and how that was, a sexist perspective because women it's sort of socially inaccessible to wear the same thing every day. So there are a lot of little things that come into play, yes.
Selena, speaking of high-powered tech CEOs, I want to ask about the story you broke earlier this year about Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and his comments. Will you set this up for us and tell us a little backstory? What surprised you about it as you were covering it?
Absolutely. So again, at the Grace Hopper celebration earlier this year, there was a panel with Satya Nadella, and he was asked about raises, like how to ask for raises. And Maria Callaway was there, and she was interviewing him and said, there are a lot of women in the audience who are uncomfortable asking for raises or who know their value and yet don't know how to approach this topic. And what advice would you give to them? And again, it was a majority women were in the audience. And so he responded and said, rely on karma. And when your managers realize that you're doing a good job, you'll get paid. You'll get paid what they think you deserve, and you'll get that raise. And it was really befuddling. And there were a lot of women in the audience. Of course, everyone was live tweeting this whole thing, and all of the comments on Twitter from the women in the audience, just like, oh, really? You're going to trust the system? I mean, the system has what's screwed us for years. I mean, you can't necessarily say that to put all of your faith in the system that has discriminated against women for so long. I mean, the wage gap still exists. There is still this unconscious bias, like we talked about earlier, and so that was kind of pretty surprising, and especially in light of Satya's earlier comments about the women in the workplace and all the initiatives that Microsoft is doing to really further diversity, not just for women, but people of color, people with disabilities. And so that sort of came out of left field. And Maria was great, and she said, hold on a second. That's not good advice. Yeah. And she, right on stage, she said, you know what? I will tell you my advice. You talk to your peers, you do your research, see what you are really worth, what the average salary for people in your position is. Practice with your close confidants and say, this is how I'm going to ask my manager for a raise. So it was very clear immediately that he'd said the wrong thing. And he didn't apologize, actually, until it was called out across social media and traditional media as well. And it got picked up. And it was like and even his following apology wasn't really an apology. It was like, oh, well, this is the system. And it's like, okay, well, yes, like the system is broken. And it actually came out a little bit later that was actually the system at Microsoft. And they do tell their employees to rely on managers to give the correct raises. So this is something that has existed at this company for years and years and years. But what it was an example of a tech CEO being completely unself-aware as to the rest of the industry and not aware of what women and people of color go through and really not realizing that, hey, this is not the industry standard. What happens at Microsoft, it might work for Microsoft, but it's not industry-wide. And later on, they definitely had to do some damage control. He did apologize in follow-up memos to Microsoft employees, and he since backtracked on that statement. And The funny thing is just I have a hard time believing that Satya Nadella has never in his life asked for a raise. I mean, that's a pretty common thing that people in positions of power do, and not even in positions of power, just all throughout the industry. It's a fairly common thing. So that just surprised everyone in the audience, including myself. And I'm glad that so many people started the conversation about how to ask for raises.
Well, you know, it was enlightening because, I mean, he was essentially demonstrating the problem, which is the degree to which people in positions to do something about it are completely immersed in the stereotypes and the what I would call the big lie about technology, which is that tech is for guys. And we're going to get into later on in the show where that began. It might have began in 1984. We'll get into that. Well, let's take a break, and I want to tell you about Squarespace, the most amazing place in the world to build and maintain a website. I've been using it for several years. I use it for blogging and for other uses, and it's just a fantastic place for so many reasons, and one of them are their amazing templates. They have the most beautifully designed templates you'll find anywhere on the internet. You simply pick one, and once you've chosen it, you can modify it to your heart's content. You can edit it, you can change it, you can add pages to it, you can add your own graphics, you can change the color of the font, the types, size, all of that stuff. You can do anything you want, but when you start with a great design, you're going to end up with a great design. And it's so easy to use. Squarespace 7, the new version, allows you to edit live on one screen. No more toggling between Site Manager to preview mode. You can even preview designs in device mode, so you can see how your site will look on tablets and on a smartphone. You really want to make sure that you thrill your smartphone users, because every single passing month, more and more people will be looking at your site with a mobile device. And that's yet another reason to use Squarespace. Start a free 2-week trial with no credit card required and start building your website. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT, and that'll get you 10% off and show your support for Tech News Today. And to begin using Squarespace 7, existing customers can go to the Settings tab to activate all the new goodies. And we thank Squarespace for their support of Tech News Today. Remember, Squarespace, start here, go anywhere. We keep dancing around this story, so I want to jump into it. Elise, can you talk about the meritocracy myth? What is the meritocracy myth?
So it's a really prevalent defense in the tech industry against claims of bias. So in the tech world, a lot of folks in Silicon Valley will say, "Oh, well, technology is a meritocracy. Those with the cream will rise to the top, and those with merit will naturally succeed." But if we followed that logic, then those with merit happen to be predominantly white and predominantly male, which raises some real questions about whether meritocracy really rules the day.
And predominantly went to Stanford, MIT, and Harvard.
Exactly.
That's
so the
where
reality
the meritocracy is.
Far more complex, that you're already pointing that out. The reality is far more complex, and tech has proven, especially in venture funding and in hiring, to be a lot more about privilege than just meritocracy. So when we talk about privilege, it's people who can work for free. When it comes to internships, those who go to certain colleges, those who already have networks and friends in the companies that they get hired by. And so this is privilege that's not necessarily meritocracy. And that myth needs to be busted, especially by the folks in positions of power in Silicon Valley, for women to systemically get a better shot.
Yeah, and 8% of venture-backed startup, you talked about venture capital. This is kind of one of the foundational elements of the sort of invisible stuff that consumers don't really see, which is the vendor funding. The kingmakers are essentially the people in venture funding companies who decide who gets the money and who doesn't. And only 8% of those venture-backed startups are founded by women, only 8%. And the other thing that is part of this meritocracy myth is the idea that entrepreneurs are a scrappy lot that come from all walks of life. But in reality, if you look at them demographically, in addition to gender, they are substantially wealthy, substantially better educated. And of course, in Silicon Valley, there's a huge number of technologists who are from other countries. India's heavily represented, China and so on. But if you look at even within the demographics of the country of origin, a predominant number of the tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are from a specific elite caste within India traditionally, that sort of thing. So the meritocracy myth is, I think, one of the things that sort of clouds the thinking around this whole issue. The idea, and this is exactly, I think, what Satya Nadella was expressing. He believes it's a meritocracy. Just work hard, don't ask for a raise, wait for karma, and the meritocracy will kick in and make all your dreams come true.
Exactly. And Selena and Sarah, I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say about that too, and how that's played in some of your reporting or in your interviews with folks.
Yeah. So,
sorry. Go ahead.
So I think what a lot of people say over and over is that, you know, I am a woman, but I feel like because I'm a woman, I didn't get the job over the man that had the job. And I actually attended a panel. You guys might remember Julianne Horvath, who quit GitHub after alleging harassment. Mm-hmm. And she said that that it was a lot like Lord of the Flies at GitHub. I mean, they hired the people that looked like them. They hired their friends. They hired, you know, people that they already knew. And there wasn't a whole lot of diversity in the ranks, especially in the technical positions. And she said that there used to be a meritocracy rug. Actually, at GitHub, they have a replica. They have a replica of the White House, and there was a meritocracy rug in the middle of the floor, and it was highly criticized earlier this year because it was kind of a prime example of the tone deafness of Silicon Valley. And so after Julianne Horvath quit, there was a lot of talk about the meritocracy and who are people hiring at these startups, especially because when you're in a startup position, you tend to hire those people that you know. You tend to network and you hustle. A lot of times it's like a lot of these companies are started in college. So it's your fraternity brothers that you kind of get involved in the startup, and you don't really go outside of that, outside of your bubble. And so that, I think, does play a large part in it. But yeah, Sarah might have other opinions.
I think the root of it goes back to what you were saying earlier, is that entrepreneurs are taught to solve problems that resonate with them, and then they pitch those ideas to venture capitalists who may have similar backgrounds, and then it's just this cycle of funding ideas that may appeal to a certain demographic. And then, you know, this whole meritocracy issue, I mean, the first employees of a startup are the employees that end up with the most equity. So when the startup has an exit, those people get paid, and then they go on to create other companies. So if you just think about this in terms of a cycle of wealth, right? The people who look like each other hiring people who look like them, and then those people get rich and start the next companies and hire people who look like them. It can be an issue.
Well, I want to talk about what happened in 1984. There was an interesting article in NPR. At least you didn't write it, but it was an interesting article anyway. And
he's my teammate, Steve Henn, right, from Planet Money.
Exactly. And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Elise, but the essential thesis is this. Once upon a time in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and in fact, I'm old enough, unlike the three of you, to remember life before 1984. And there wasn't essentially a lot of cultural baggage around what kind of people technologists were. Essentially, technology and computer science and all that kind of stuff was, generally speaking, not something that the public thought a lot about because, of course, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have home computers for the most part. And so it was sort of out of sight, out of mind. And everybody who went into technology, men and women, boys and girls in education, mostly men and women in college and so on, their first encounter with technology happened at the same time. Men and women both encountered technology in the same classes and did equally well. And there was this weird concept that emerged later that tech is for boys and men instead of girls and women. Sort of happened in 1984, because what happened was we started having technology products like the PC Junior, like the Apple Macintosh. We started having video gaming consoles, and these were consumer products that had to be marketed with advertising. And the marketing and the advertising zeroed in on boys. They zeroed in on technology is for boys. The shoot 'em up games and all this kind of stuff were targeted as boys' toys or boys' information, and then all kinds of movies. Remember all the hacker movies in the 80s that came out, and they were all about the hacker guy and his girlfriend. So Hollywood played its role in creating this myth that technology is for guys, and then after that, the numbers started to go down. If you look at the chart that was accompanying this article, you see all the sort of STEM educational attributes, the law school, physical science, medical school, computer science. You see the red line is computer science taking a dive in 1984, 85. And basically one of the reasons for that is because technology is marketed to boys. Boys are getting these things and playing with them. And then when boys and girls and men and women engage in academic treatments of technology, the boys have already been programming. Back in those days, to use a PC was to program it, and the girls had not. And then the assumption started to be in this class, we assume that you are familiar with technology. And so boys had an advantage because they've been marketed to. And so this is where the myth began. You see that the number of women in technology among programmers and computer science in general used to be much higher than it is now. Back when sexism was more rampant, I would hazard to say, in the larger culture, but in technology, it went in the other direction. It's an interesting thesis. Selena Larson, what do you think of it?
So I actually think that that's pretty accurate. There was a lot of, it was marketed towards boys. Even the Game Boy, if you think about it, with the rise of video games, that again, it was something that the boys would play. I think that also too, a lot has to do with way back. I mean, this is before 1984. There was something called the ENIAC Programmers Project in the 1940s, and women were among the first programmers of this computer. It was developed during World War II. And even back then, when this technology was unveiled after World War II, the women were not given credit for the programming that they did, and it was given to the men. So I think that that has a lot to do with that. I mean, looking back, when those numbers start to fall in 1984, and now here we are now, there's no role models to look up to. When you're consistently being targeted with advertising that's geared towards boys, when you're consistently said that, oh, well, this piece of technology can help women stay at home and work on, doing the taxes or work on saving recipes in this computer that they have, and oh, the men can play these really cool games. I mean, that's kind of where you start to see this disparity.
Right, and the more we continue to lack women
yes.
who are designing these programs and coming and marketing them, then the more the problem continues to feed itself.
Exactly. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you are not highlighting the women, when you're not targeting the women, when you're not showing young girls people that they can look up to, I mean, it's consistently going to have more boys in this field.
Well, I think one thing that is interesting to think about in terms of the future of this is that the education for computer programming is becoming more and more accessible to anyone, right? So you can look online and join communities for certain programming languages. You can take classes for free, or even quit your job and do a crash course. And you see women doing that, and you see people who didn't think that computer programming could be a career for them, choosing it later or choosing it even before they go to college. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes the numbers, if at all.
Mm-hmm. And I also have to say, too, a lot of the women I've talked to, even Tracy Chow, who is an engineer at Pinterest, and she's one of the most visible women here in Silicon Valley and an advocate for diversity in technology. She's actually told me that when she was enrolled in college, she was deterred from the computer science and actually studied electrical engineering because so many of the people that were studying computer science had so many years of experience. And then it's not only, you talk a lot about the pipeline problem, the education problem. I think what we don't talk enough about is the problem of retention and retaining women. I mean, you can make the numbers equal. You can have 50% men and women in computer science classes, but then 10 years down the line, all of the women are gone because they can't stay in this culture that is very male dominated, and that's a problem that we don't really talk about a lot. So I think it's awesome that the numbers are improving, but I think that a criticism that we sort of forget about is this retention problem.
I think that's a great point, Selena, because we looked at those abysmal numbers in Silicon Valley, which all of these companies claim they're trying really hard, and yet they were looking at 16% of the people in tech and engineering and software engineering and so on are women. I mean, it's a horribly low number. That number, there's a lot behind that number. That is low because of the women who were dissuaded from the education, who had the education and then went into other fields, who started in a job like that and then left. The numbers of the women who leave the technology fields is much higher not only than men, but it's much higher than women in other fields. So in law and all these other fields. So it's clearly, there's clearly a couple of things going on there. There's garden variety sexism, but there's also this pervasive technology special thing about technology that's doing damage in all these different areas that leads us to this extreme minority. Women are a majority in the population, 51%, more than 50%, and yet 16% in engineering jobs. So it's really, there's a lot behind it. It's not just education. It's, you know, so many women have gotten all the education, all the experience, and then they leave because they can't take it. Well, in just a sec, we're going to get into some possible ideas for what could be done about this. But first, I want to tell you about Personal Capital. What is Personal Capital? Personal Capital is the place that's going to help you get your financial house in order. So if you're going to make a New Year's resolution, and you should, why not make a resolution to get your financial house in tip-top shape? And Personal Capital will help you do that. And here's how they do it. If you go to Wall Street or any sort of financial industry professional, they're going to have amazing visual graphics that enable them to see clearly what's happening with money. And that's exactly what Personal Capital does, but it's for you personally, your money. So right now, you have got your financial information scattered all over the place. You've got a 401k over here, a savings account over there, a checking account over here. You've got, you know, all kinds of stuff. Personal Capital will bring it all together in a single view so you can use their intuitive charts and graphs to really understand what's happening with your money. It's a complete intuitive financial dashboard to get all your accounts in one place so you can make smart financial decisions and manage your portfolio like a professional. And that's why they do it so well, and that's why you can do it so well as well. Set up your free account. Go to personalcapital.com/TNT. And remember that Personal Capital is free, and it's the smart way to grow your money. And we thank Personal Capital for their support of Tech News Today. Okay, so we talked about the issue of this sort of 1984 thing where there's been this pervasive marketing by both marketers and also the media to program the culture, you know, program boys and girls to believe that technology is a guy thing. And that's done huge amounts of damage, and it suggests a specific course. Now, my son, Kevin, actually works in Silicon Valley, and he works for a company that teaches software programming to children. The company's called Tinker, and he personally leads a lot of sessions teaching kids, to introducing them to the Tinker platform, and they're very, very young. These are 8, 9-year-old kids, and this is sort of like, 8-year-old kids nowadays are similar to adults going to college in the 70s and 80s, where they're being introduced to programming for the first time. And like in those days, there isn't, the kids are unaware that tech is a guy thing. They haven't been programmed with that false notion. And so what he's noticed is the interest in these, he's led camps, for example, which are, kids sign up voluntarily to join these camps. And he's found no gender differences. The interest by girls at that age is just as high as it is for boys. Kids vary in their ability, the degree to which they pick up on the technology or don't, aren't so good at it. And there's no differences in gender. The top 6 kids are half boys, half girls. The bottom 6 kids are half boys, half girls. And it's been a very eye-opening thing. He's done a lot of documentation of this phenomenon. Does that suggest a solution here? Does education need to go way back to the young kids and get them into technology before the world tells them it's not for them?
Well, even if it does or if it does sort of equalize at the toddler level or at the elementary school level, what we're really seeing the problem is happening in high school and beyond among teachers who might believe that, boys are naturally wired for science and math in a way that women aren't, or that girls' brains aren't. So there's a cultural and systemic bias that's happening in education, but beyond, right? So we're also in the classroom, right? There's a bunch of middle school girls that I interviewed recently who talked about, being really interested in science, but then getting outnumbered in classrooms by boy classmates who raised their hands all the time, and they felt like they never really got a chance to kind of have a voice in the classroom. So even if you do sort of equalize things at the very beginning, and there's really parity at elementary school and younger levels, what's happening is retention later. And then when you get into the workforce, there's a lot of these Silicon Valley companies or tech companies in general that advertise a certain kind of culture, the stay all night, live together culture. There's one tech startup where everybody lives in the same house. The sort of, we talked a little bit about dress code and dressing down and these sorts of things. I mean, that all plays into a male culture. What happens when these young women programmers want to have a family and don't want to work and pull these all-nighters and do these sorts of things? Like, immediately the culture doesn't keep them. So I think retention is the bigger problem.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Selena.
I was going to say, I agree. There's actually a study done recently that 41% of women leave careers in technology compared to just 17% of men in 10 years. And that definitely has a lot to do, like what Elise just mentioned, about having a family or the stress and the hours that you have to fulfill. But I definitely think that a lot of that too is just you get tired, you get burnt out. I've talked to a lot of women who said that even when they're in a management position or a leadership position and they're recruiting and they're doing interviews, people will come in, male potential employees will come in and be surprised that there's a female interviewing them. You kind of get this boys club attitude where let's go out to drinks after work, or I have this mentee, and what I did with all of my previous mentees was we would go watch football or we would go to the bar and play beer pong. I have a female mentee. I don't know how to interact with her because I don't want to come across as being inappropriate, or I don't want her to think that I'm flirting, or et cetera, et cetera. It's not just like technical in the workplace interaction, but it's also that social interaction where you have to learn how to have same thing, like learn how to have different interactions. And when you're up against this every day of your life and you're thinking and you're a hiring manager and you're interviewing 3 out of 10 candidates that are baffled that there's a female engineer on staff, or you go to a tech conference and they ask if you are a PR person for the company instead of the person that wrote the code. It can be very stressful. But I would say, though, that there are a lot of ways that people can combat this. And I think one of the most important things that people can do is just think through how someone else's experience might be. And I can't remember who said it, but it was this fantastic woman that I was chatting with. And she says, wake up every day thinking that I'm going to learn something about a new community or a different person, and look at a situation or a scenario from someone else's perspective. And that just in and of itself can be a huge difference maker in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, Sarah, you wrote an interesting piece where you suggested that, at least in the view of one or two of your sources, that part of the solution is to stop scaring women. For example, if there is a 16-year-old girl right now listening to this show, are we scaring her out of technology? We were talking about these horrible realities.
I mean, I think what we're talking about is very much the reality, and what they are looking at is all of these headlines that come across. Snapchat CEO sending emails talking about getting sorority girls drunk and convincing them to perform sexual acts. We had women who have come out this year and talked about pitching their companies to venture capitalists and getting hit on or getting felt up. I mean, there are headlines over and over. There was Gamergate, and these women are internalizing those messages, and women who are in the industry have taken time out of their days to go talk to recruits and say, okay, it can be bad, but it's not that bad. You're not going to get attacked. Right? It's a good career. I've done it. I had a baby last week. They're going out and they're saying, like, please, can we just, every person who joins my company who is a woman counts and adds to the numbers and can make a difference. And, that's really the only way they see to solve the problem.
Interesting. And one final possible idea for a partial solution is the idea that's been forwarded by some advocates for women in technology, which is that women-only tech education, like, educational context where all of the students are women, all the teachers are women, women-only venture capital firms, women-only startups. Is this a good part of the solution, Selena? What do you think?
So I think that for some people it might be. I know, for instance, Hackbright Academy is one of the Learn to Code programs that is out there that is only for women, and they have tremendous success. And they work with a lot of companies that recruit directly from graduates from their organization, and I think that's great. I think that in part that actually solves the problem of having mentors and people that you can look up to, and learning from people and saying, look, this is something that I can achieve, right? It can definitely be intimidating when you're the only girl in the room. So if the only way for some people to get involved in technology and in STEM is to go to women-only programs, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for that. I don't think that it's fair to say you can forever work in women-only STEM careers or in the technology field, and everywhere that you're going to go is going to be women-only, and that's like obviously not a fair expectation. But I think that for a lot of people, that's a great way to get started. And I know that that people that go to women-only hackathons or women-only Learn to Code programs, or even just women-only mentorship programs, I think that that is a first step in getting involved in technology. And the companies that are recruiting and partnering with these organizations to recruit engineers from these programs, I think that's fantastic.
You talked earlier about the companies committing themselves to the issue and releasing their numbers this year, saying it's an issue they want to solve. These programs can benefit from the companies really, they say they want to solve the problem, but they have zero idea how to start. The programs like Girls Who Code and the female-only venture capital firms can be resources for the companies figuring out, how do I really start to add more women to my company? Maybe these are avenues for figuring out solutions, getting connected.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Well, it's been a fantastic conversation here about women in technology. I think everybody listening should continue to follow this topic, and you can start by following everybody who's on this show. Selena Larson is at dailydot.com, and you can follow her on Twitter, and you should follow her on Twitter at Selena Larson. Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of Tech News Today.
Thank you.
And Sarah Frier is at bloomberg.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at Sarah Frier. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
All right. And of course, both of these journalists write about technology in general, in addition to women in technology. And Elise Hu, thank you so much for being our special edition co-anchor today. Skype hasn't been cooperating, but I really thank you for being on today.
I'm sorry I'm not coming through all clear, but it was great to be with you guys. And thanks for the excellent discussion.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS. Just go to twit.tv/TNT and choose your favorite way to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Tech News Today TV. Send us email to tnt@twit.tv and call us at 260-TNT Show. Don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific, tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name is Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in tomorrow for our second special holiday episode. Talk to you later.